Not everyone who smiles at you deserves to know the real you. Not everyone who stays intends to stay when it gets dark. You've been soft in places you should have been steel. You've let them in through doors you didn't even know were open. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that love meant exposure, that if you weren't fully raw, you weren't fully real. But here's the truth. No one told you in the beginning. Some people don't want to know you. They just want access to what knowing you gives them. And by the time you figure it out, you're already empty, already cracked, already starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, the real you wasn't worth staying for. But they're wrong. And so were you for thinking you ever had to bleed to be loved. In this video, we're going somewhere most people never dare to go, right into that quiet part of you, the part that's been hiding in plain sight, the part that loves deeply but doesn't feel seen, the part that smiles while silently checking the exits in every relationship, the part that wants closeness but doesn't know how to be held without bracing for the moment it ends. We're not here to analyze. We're not here to heal. We're here to remember, to reclaim. You won't find advice in this space, only reflection. No answers, just echoes that sound a lot like your own voice. Because sometimes that's all it takes to wake up, to realize that you've been giving gold to those who only ever came for glitter. So take a breath. Sink into the silence between these words. This isn't just a video, it's a mirror. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, it's one that won't ask you to shrink. If anything I say feels like truth you've been holding inside, subscribe to this space. Like the video so we can find the others who've been hiding too. Because the real you, they deserve a place to exhale. You started bending early. Before you even had the language for why, you noticed things, little shifts in tone, the pause in someone's breath before they spoke, the way their eyes dimmed when you were too much or lit up when you made yourself small. You learned fast. Love wasn't something you received just for being. It was something you had to earn by adjusting. So you became a contortionist of self, smiling when you wanted to scream, agreeing when your soul said no, laughing a little louder than you felt, just to keep the mood light. And at first it worked. People called you kind, easy, empathic, a good listener. They never knew you were slowly erasing your own voice in service of theirs. But the worst part, you didn't even resent it. You were proud of your ability to love without needing much in return. You thought it made you strong. You thought it made you good. No one tells you how seductive self-abandonment can be when it's masked as generosity. You started giving not because they asked, but because you hoped if you gave enough, they'd never leave. You kept trying to prove that you were worth staying for by becoming easier to stay with. Less opinionated, less complicated, less you. But they left anyway. Or worse, they stayed. And you vanished beneath the weight of who you had to be just to keep them close. And when it ended, you didn't just grieve the relationship, you grieved yourself. Because somewhere in that mess of trying to be loved, you forgot how to be you. There's a silence that follows that kind of grief. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, like a house that used to hold laughter, but now just echoes when you walk through it alone. You sit with yourself in that silence and wonder, did they ever even know me? Or did they just love the character I played? That's when it hits you. You were auditioning for love in your own life, and you didn't even know it. You remember the first time someone praised the version of you that wasn't real. Maybe it was when you kept your mouth shut even though your heart was breaking. Maybe it was when you smiled through a situation that made your stomach twist. Maybe it was when you laughed at a joke that stung like salt in an open wound. And they said, "You're so strong. You're easy to be around. You're different. I like that." So you wore that praise like armor. And with each compliment, you learned what was safe to show and what was better left hidden. That's how the mask formed, not all at once, but slowly, gently like frost creeping over a window pane, dulling the warmth behind the glass. And it worked. You were liked. You were needed. You were wanted at least. The version of you that played nice, stayed quiet, didn't ask for much. But under the surface, something was breaking. Because every time someone said, "I love who you are," you couldn't help but wonder, which part? The one that agrees too quickly? The one that never interrupts? The one that pretends they're fine just to keep the peace? You started to realize they weren't loving you. They were loving the version of you that was digestible, convenient, the version of you that didn't have needs. And the irony? The more you gave them that version, the lonelier you felt in their arms. Because deep down, all you ever wanted was for someone to look at you and say, I see the mess, and I'm not going anywhere. I see the weight you carry, and I want to help you hold it. I see you, and you don't have to shrink to be loved here. But that never came. And so you started shrinking out of habit, out of survival, not because you were weak, but because you were trying to stay in rooms that were never built for your full self. At some point, you stopped noticing the shrinking. It became routine, choosing silence over honesty, softness over boundaries, politeness over pain. You began measuring your worth by how little space you could take up, by how well you could anticipate their needs, by how quickly you could disappear into their comfort zones. You called it love, but it wasn't. It was fear dressed up as affection, fear disguised as loyalty. Because deep down, you were afraid that if you ever stood still and showed up fully, they would see you and walk away. So you did what you always did. You performed. You adjusted your tone, your thoughts, your desires. You made yourself easier to love by becoming less yourself. But the ache didn't leave. No matter how good you became at pretending. In fact, it got louder. It started whispering at night when you couldn't distract yourself. It started showing up in your chest, in the heaviness you couldn't explain. It started breaking through in quiet tears you didn't even know were building. You kept asking, why does it hurt to be loved? But that's not the real question. The real question is, who are you being loved as? Because if it's not the real you, it's not love. It's performance. It's obligation. It's dependency dressed up as devotion. And that's the kind of love that drains you. The kind that leaves you wondering if maybe you're the problem. If maybe you're just too much, too sensitive, too needy, too real. But you're not. You're just used to being in spaces that reward your silence and punish your truth. You've been giving the most sacred parts of you to people who only like the idea of you. They wanted the calm, not the storm. The smile, not the truth. The presence, not the depth. And every time you gave them that edited version, you chipped away at your own soul. No wonder you're tired. No wonder you're guarded. No wonder you keep questioning your own worth. You've been paying love's price with your authenticity. One day, you'll wake up and realize you don't recognize the person you've become, not because you've changed too much, but because you've changed too little in the direction of yourself. You'll stare into the mirror, and instead of seeing your reflection, you'll see a patchwork of everyone you tried to please. Their preferences, their moods, their opinions stitched into your choices, their comfort woven into your silence. You didn't mean to disappear. You just got tired of fighting to be understood. You told yourself it was easier to bend than to break. But you forego. Bending for too long is its own kind of breaking. And now, here you are, exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Not because life's been too hard, but because you've been carrying too many versions of yourself that don't belong to you. And it's not your fault. You were taught that love must be earned. That presence must be deserved. That to be accepted, you had to perform. They told you love is unconditional, but showed you it was transactional. So you became currency. Smiles in exchange for approval. Compliance in exchange for warmth. Disappearance in exchange for peace. But here's the quiet truth. The real you has always been enough. They just weren't ready for someone they couldn't control. Someone they couldn't mold. Someone who didn't fit neatly into their image of what love should feel like. Safe for them, even if it was hollow for you. And yet, you stayed. Because hope is a stubborn thing. Because some part of you still believed they might turn around and say, I choose all of you, but they didn't. They chose the version you made easy for them, and you paid for it with pieces of your truth. It's okay to grieve that. It's okay to admit that being strong cost you softness. That being agreeable cost you authenticity. That being chosen cost you yourself. But you're here now, and you're beginning to hear your voice again. Faint, cracked, but yours. There's a moment quiet, almost imperceptible when your soul starts returning. Not loudly, not all at once, but in fragments. It might come through the shake in your voice when you finally say, no. Or in the stillness that follows when you don't rush to fill the silence with apology. It might come when you no longer laugh at the joke that hurts. When you step back from the conversations that feel like cages. When you stop chasing the text, the approval, the scraps. You don't owe anyone the version of you that kept you small. Let that sink in. You were never created to be palatable. You were never meant to shrink for someone else's ease. You were never meant to be loved in pieces. You are a whole person, messy, brilliant, complicated, and utterly worthy of a love that doesn't ask you to fragment yourself to be understood. But you can't find that love by remaining loyal to spaces that taught you to hide. You can't heal in the same place that convinced you you're broken. You have to start choosing differently, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for yourself. And that might mean letting go of the people who only called when they needed something, of the ones who praised your light but never sat with your shadows, of the ones who mistook your softness for weakness and your silence for consent. Letting go doesn't mean they were never important. It means you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed their validation to breathe. It means your healing has begun. You may not trust it at first. You'll reach for the mask. You'll feel the old urge to explain, to soften, to adjust. But pause, breathe. You're not in survival anymore. You're in the beginning of something sacred. The return, the reunion, with the parts of you that were buried under other people's comfort, with the voice that trembled but never stopped speaking, even when no one was listening, with the self that has waited patiently for you to come home. You don't need to prove your worth anymore, not through how much you tolerate, not through how little you ask for, not through the way you hold everything together while falling apart inside. That version of love, the one built on endurance instead of reciprocity, you can leave it behind now. It's not your job to teach someone how to treat you. It's not your mission to fix the ones who only show up broken. It's not your role to carry relationships that sit heavy on only your shoulders. You've done that for far too long. And maybe you thought that being needed was the same as being loved. But now you know, being needed is not intimacy. It's not safety. It's not home. It's just another way you disappeared beneath someone else's chaos. But love, real love sees you. Real love holds space, not expectation. Real love wants your truth, not your performance. And until you believe that, you'll keep folding. You'll keep mistaking anxiety for connection. You'll keep silencing yourself in hopes they won't leave. You'll keep giving them more than they earned just to feel less empty. But you're waking up now. You're realizing that being misunderstood doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're no longer tailoring yourself to fit someone else's limitations. And yes, that kind of freedom comes with loneliness at first, because when you stop overgiving, you also start noticing who was only there because you did. But let that silence clear the room. Let it make space for the ones who aren't afraid of your depth, for the ones who don't flinch when you speak your truth, for the ones who stay, not because you shrink, but because you don't. You're allowed to want that. You're allowed to wait for that. You're allowed to protect the real you, not because she's broken, but because she's finally whole enough to be guarded. You'll start noticing the shift in the smallest ways. You'll pause before replying to that message that once made your heart race. You'll stop over-explaining when someone misunderstands your boundaries. You'll hear the question, "Are you okay?" And instead of your usual "I'm fine," you'll answer with a truth so quiet it shakes the room, because you're done pretending. You're done with the performance. Done with the applause that only comes when you're suffering in silence. Done with the version of love that demands your disappearance as proof of devotion. And it will be disorienting at first, because you've built a world around being agreeable. You've learned how to keep the peace by betraying yourself. So when you finally start choosing you, it won't feel like peace. It'll feel like guilt, because guilt is what happens when your conditioning meets your healing. But don't confuse guilt with wrongness. Don't confuse discomfort with a lack of progress. You're not being selfish. You're being honest. You're learning that your needs don't make you needy. They make you human. You're not here to be easy. You're here to be real. And the people who truly love you, they won't require the edited version. They won't celebrate the watered-down version of your heart. They'll sit with the intensity. They'll honor the chaos. They'll listen when your voice cracks and say, "Keep going, I'm still here." That's the kind of love you've been starving for. The kind that doesn't demand sacrifice as proof. The kind that doesn't ask you to split yourself into manageable parts. But here's the twist. You have to give it to yourself first. Before anyone else sees you, you have to see you. And maybe that's the hardest part. Because when you strip away the masks, you're left with someone you've avoided for years. But stay. Don't look away. This is the beginning of everything you've been aching for. You'll sit with yourself one evening. Not in distraction, not in performance, but in full presence. No music, no screen, no one to impress, just you. And for the first time in a long time, you won't feel the urge to escape your own company. There's a kind of intimacy in that. A sacredness. Because when you've spent years building your identity around being needed, sitting with no one but yourself feels like exile at first. But then, it starts to feel like freedom. You'll notice the thoughts that once scared you now soften. You'll hear your own needs rise up, not as demands, but as reminders. I'm still here. I still matter. I've always mattered. That's when the healing deepens, not in the grand declarations, not in the new you announcements, but in the quiet choosing of self, over and over and over again. You'll find yourself walking away faster from conversations that feel like transactions. You'll stop trying to convince people to stay. You'll stop apologizing for being too soft, too honest, too much, because you'll realize you were never too much. They were just too little to meet you there. And you don't need to fold in half just to make someone feel whole. You don't need to dim your brilliance just to soothe someone's insecurity. You don't need to twist yourself into a shape they find comfortable. That was never your job. You are not here to be palatable. You are not here to be chosen by everyone. You are here to be you, unfiltered, unapologetics, unfolding. And the ones meant for you, they won't flinch, they won't flee. They'll look you in the eyes and say, I've been waiting for you to show up like this. And when that happens, you'll know. All the lonely nights, all the letting go, all the moments of doubt, they led you here, to a life that fits the real you. You'll stop romanticizing the people who only loved the silence you gave them, the ones who stayed as long as you stayed small, the ones who only praised your light when it didn't reveal their shadows, because now you see it clearly. It wasn't love, it was comfort, it was control, it was proximity dressed up as intimacy. And you were starving for connection, so you settled for closeness without depth. For I'm here that never really meant, I see you, but now you know better. Now you're learning that being alone in your truth is safer than being surrounded in your performance. That silence with yourself is more sacred than noise with the wrong ones. You're learning to unlearn, to untangle the false equations. Love endurance, value usefulness, belonging equals compliance. You're rewriting every rule that made you feel like love was something to earn. Because here's what no one told you when you were young and too observant for your own good. The real you doesn't need to be earned. The real you isn't a reward for someone else's patience, isn't a bonus for good behavior, isn't a secret treasure to be unlocked only by those who hurt you just enough to be forgiven. The real you is not a prize. You're a presence, and you don't need to be chased. You need to be met. Not halfway, not in compromise, but in truth. You are no longer available for the kind of love that feels like hiding. You are no longer saying yes to the attention that costs your peace. Because you finally understand, attention is not affection. Obsession is not care. Loyalty is not love when it comes with conditions that erase you. You are returning to yourself. Not the self that was shaped by their expectations, but the self that existed before you ever had to choose between being loved and being whole. And this time, you're not abandoning her. There's something terrifying and beautiful about meeting yourself after all these years. She's quieter than you remember, not because she lacks strength, but because she's been watching you survive without her. She never left. You just stopped visiting. You forgot her voice beneath the noise of everyone else's. You buried her softness beneath all the armor you thought you needed to wear to be safe. But now, as you sit in this stillness, you see her, and she sees you. There's no judgment, no blame, just recognition. You both know what it cost to make it here. How many times you bit your tongue. How many times you held your own pain just to hold someone else together. How many times you abandoned yourself for the sake of being understood by people who were never listening. And you grieve for her, not with sadness alone, but with reverence. Because she didn't fight to be loved, she waited to be remembered. And now that you do, everything shifts. You no longer crave the shallow kind of attention that fades when you stop performing. You crave presence, depth, stillness, spaces that feel like safety instead of surveillance, connections where you don't have to explain why you are the way you are. You begin to love differently. You begin to love gently, but not at the cost of your own clarity. You begin to give, but not as currency. You begin to speak, not to be convincing, but to be heard. You're no longer interested in being palatable. You want to be true, even if that means fewer people understand you, even if that means walking alone longer than expected, because now, you'd rather walk alone in honesty than stay surrounded in self-abandonment. And when they ask, what changed? You won't give them a speech. You won't list your boundaries. You won't need to explain. You'll just smile, hold your own gaze in the mirror, and know, not everyone deserves the real me. The most radical thing you'll ever do is stop begging to be seen. Not because you've stopped wanting it, but because you've started giving it to yourself. You'll stop showing up in places where your silence is more valuable than your truth. You'll stop reaching out just to prove you still matter. You'll stop apologizing for being affected, for feeling too deeply, for needing a pause before answering. You'll begin honoring your sensitivity as sacred, not as something to fix. Because now you understand. What you used to call too much was just honesty that hadn't found a home yet. And as you grow, you'll feel the grief too. The grief of realizing how long you've been molding yourself to fit into rooms that were never built for your spirit. The grief of looking back at your own patterns and whispering, I didn't know better, but I do now. And most of all, the grief of knowing how much of your life you've spent giving your light to those who only showed up when it was convenient to stand in it. But that grief doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're awake. You've stopped performing. You've stopped contorting. You've stopped auditioning. You've realized that your worth has nothing to do with how lovable you appear, and everything to do with how truthful you are willing to be. And when someone new enters your life, you won't start with your softest parts. You won't hand them your heart in the first hour. You won't explain your soul just to be accepted. You'll sit back. You'll watch. You'll feel. You'll notice how they speak in silence, how they react when you disagree, how they show up when you no longer perform. Because now, you know, the real you is not a trial version. The real you is not a preview. The real you is not a placeholder for someone else's comfort. She is the whole experience. And not everyone gets access. There will come a day when someone tries to return to the version of you they once knew. The one who over-explained, over-apologized, overgave. They'll speak to you in the old language, expecting the old rhythm, but they won't find her. Not because you're angry, not because you're punishing them, but because you've outgrown the need to be understood by people who only ever loved your silence. And that moment, that's when you'll feel it. Not bitterness, not triumph, but peace, because you finally get it. You were never hard to love. You were just offering your heart to people who had no idea how to hold it. Now, you hold it. You hold it gently, firmly, with the kind of reverence you used to reserve for everyone else. And it changes everything. You stop being impressed by intensity, by empty apologies, by crumbs of affection dressed up as feasts. You start seeking presence. You start protecting your peace. You start becoming someone you trust, not someone you manage. Because real healing, it's not loud, it's not cinematic. It's the quiet moment when you no longer chase what hurt you, when you no longer feel the need to explain your worth, when you finally sit across from your reflection and say, you're safe now. You don't have to perform. You don't have to prove. You don't have to fix what others broke in you. All you have to do is be, and that's enough. So if someone walks into your life now, they'll meet a version of you that no longer negotiates her truth for connection, a version of you that doesn't flinch when they walk away, a version of you that whispers, if you can't hold all of me, you don't get any of me. Because not everyone deserves the real you, but you do. You always have.